199 churches shut down overnight. The last priest appeared on live television, his face covered in bruises, his voice trembling as he praised the man responsible. A billionaire CEO, known for funding those very churches, had suddenly turned his loyalty elsewhere, toward Muslims. Lavish jobs, luxury homes, endless generosity. But why? What was he hiding? And why did everything lead back to a woman who had once rejected him? Ammar thought he had landed his dream job in Denmark. Instead, he had walked straight into a web of power, obsession, and a secret so dark no one dared to speak it aloud. Ammar belonged to a middle-class Muslim family where financial struggles were a daily reality. He had 4 sisters, and their father had passed away when Ammar was still a child. The absence of a father meant that the entire burden of the family fell on Ammar's mother, who struggled to make ends meet. Their home was small, their expenses always exceeded their income, and every day brought new challenges. Ammar, being the only son, had to step up to support his family from a very young age. While other children of his age were enjoying school life, Ammar was burdened with responsibilities that were far too heavy for his shoulders. By the time he reached the 10th grade, Ammar had already started working part-time jobs to contribute to the household. He worked at small shops, helped in a mechanic's garage, and even ran errands for neighbors for a small amount of money. Every rupee he earned was carefully saved to help pay the bills or buy groceries. His mother often tried to stop him, wanting him to focus on his studies, but Ammar knew that he had no choice. The family had to survive, and he was the only one who could make it happen. His sisters, though young, understood the weight of their situation and tried to contribute in whatever way they could, whether it was by helping their mother with household chores or cutting down on their own expenses. Life took a turn when Ammar's eldest sister, Aisha, completed her education and secured a job as a teacher. Her salary wasn't much, but it was enough to lighten Ammar's burden a little. She saw potential in her brother and refused to let financial difficulties hold him back. With her earnings, she decided to support Ammar's education and encouraged him to pursue chartered accountancy. It was a difficult decision, knowing that the course required years of dedication and expenses they could barely afford. However, she believed in Ammar's capabilities and was determined to see him succeed. Ammar, too, understood the sacrifices his sister was making for him. He immersed himself in his studies while still juggling small jobs to contribute as much as he could. There were nights when he barely slept, spending long hours buried in books under the dim glow of a second-hand lamp. The family still struggled, but for the first time there was a glimmer of hope. They all believed that one day Ammar's hard work would change their fate. What they didn't know was that fate had its own plans, leading Ammar toward an unexpected journey far beyond their imagination. Ammar had always dreamed of a better life for his family, and after years of struggle and dedication, he finally achieved something that could turn that dream into reality. Completing his chartered accountancy was not an easy task. It took endless nights of studying, sacrifices from his family, and an unwavering determination to succeed. But when he finally graduated and secured a job, it felt like a reward for all those years of hardship. His salary was more than enough to support his household, and for the first time the family's financial struggles began to fade. Their lives had changed. The once overwhelming burden on his shoulders had started to lighten, and Ammar could finally breathe a little easier. One day, an unexpected opportunity arrived. His firm received job vacancies from a Danish company that was specifically looking for Muslim candidates. It was a rare opportunity, one that seemed tailor-made for someone like Ammar. He didn't hesitate. He applied immediately, knowing that securing this position could elevate his career to an entirely new level. The competition was tough, but Ammar's intelligence and experience made him stand out. His interview went exceptionally well, and before he knew it, he had received an official job offer from Denmark. The moment he shared the news with his family, his sisters were overjoyed, but his mother's face turned pale. She couldn't imagine sending her only son so far away. To her, it wasn't just a job. It was a separation she wasn't ready for. She refused to let him go, insisting that they were finally doing well, and there was no need for him to leave. Amar tried to convince her, but she wouldn't listen. His sisters, on the other hand, saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They told him that if he took this job, their lives would improve even more. But no matter how much they tried, their mother's heart wouldn't accept the thought of Amar being an entire continent away from them. Amar knew that his mother would never agree to let him go, but he also understood that this opportunity was too big to ignore. After days of trying to convince her, he decided to seek help from his maternal uncle, who had always been a respected figure in their family. When Amar explained the situation, his uncle immediately realized how important this job was for Amar's future. One evening, he visited their home and sat down with Amar's mother, gently explaining why she needed to let him go. He reassured her that Ammar's success would benefit the entire family and that she should trust him to take care of himself. After a long and emotional conversation, she finally gave in, though her eyes were filled with tears. The day of Ammar's departure arrived faster than he had expected. He packed his bags, but the weight in his heart was heavier than anything he was carrying. His mother held his hands tightly, her eyes brimming with unspoken fears and prayers. The moment he hugged her for the last time before leaving, she broke down. Amar tried to stay strong, but the pain of leaving his family behind was overwhelming. His sisters stood by, their eyes reflecting both pride and sorrow. He promised them he would call every day, that he would return soon. But deep down, he knew this was the beginning of a long journey. When he arrived in Denmark, things were nothing like he had imagined. The company had arranged everything for him: a luxury apartment, personal transport, and even assistance in settling down. It felt surreal, almost as if he had stepped into a dream. He couldn't understand why the company was so generous. While he was grateful, a small part of him questioned why a foreign employer would go to such lengths to make him feel comfortable. It was strange, but at that moment, Amar was too exhausted to dwell on it. He decided to embrace his new life, unaware that this was only the beginning of something far more unusual than he had ever anticipated. Amar was given a few days to settle in before he was expected to join the office. Everything seemed perfect: his luxurious apartment, the peaceful surroundings, and the hospitality of his new workplace. But as the first day of work approached, an unsettling feeling grew in his chest. He wasn't sure why, but something about the situation felt unusual. On the morning of his first day, as he stepped outside his residence, a sleek black car was already waiting for him. He noticed that a few others were also being picked up in similar cars, while many employees were using public transport. Amar found it strange, but dismissed the thought, assuming it was just a part of the company's welcoming protocol. He got into the car, and as it moved smoothly through the city, his mind kept drifting back to the odd contrast between the employees receiving special treatment and those who weren't. When he arrived at the company building, he was stunned. The office was more magnificent than he had imagined. Tall glass windows, futuristic architecture, and an aura of authority that made it clear this was no ordinary firm. But what truly shocked him was what he saw inside. Highly qualified and experienced employees, people even smarter than him, were walking in quietly, using public transport, carrying their own bags. Meanwhile, Amar and a select few were treated differently. Guided inside with utmost respect, their needs catered to as if they were VIPs. By the time he was introduced to the company's CEO, he was already filled with questions. The CEO was a well-known businessman, a respected figure across Denmark. But there was one thing Amar couldn't ignore. This man had funded over 200 churches across the country, and yet he seemed strangely invested in a handful of Muslim employees. As the office hours came to an end, Ammar stepped outside, only to witness the same peculiar scene once again. A select few employees, including himself, were being provided with high-end cars, while the rest quietly made their way toward buses and trains. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Why were some employees being treated like royalty, while others, equally competent, were left to manage on their own? It made no sense. As he waited for his car, his eyes landed on a security guard standing near the entrance. Unlike the other guards, this man stood out. He wasn't just different, he looked superior in every way. He wore expensive shoes, a perfectly tailored uniform, and held the latest smartphone in his hands. His demeanor wasn't like that of an ordinary security guard. There was something about him that didn't fit. Ammar felt an instinctive pull toward him. Something told him that this man had answers. He approached him, hesitating for a moment before greeting him in their native language. The guard's eyes flickered with recognition, and a small smile appeared on his face. Ammar asked where he was from, and after a brief exchange of pleasantries, he couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. "You seem different," Ammar said carefully. "Your uniform, your phone, your appearance. You don't look like a regular security guard." The guard glanced around before lowering his voice. "Because I'm not," he said, "and neither are you." Ammar felt a shiver run down his spine. He hadn't expected that response. Before he could ask more, the guard leaned in slightly and said something that made Ammar's world turn upside down. Ammar's curiosity intensified as the guard's words sank in. His heart pounded as he looked at the man, waiting for an explanation. The guard glanced around cautiously, making sure no one was listening before speaking again. "You think you got this job because of your intelligence," the guard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think these luxuries are a reward for your hard work? No, my friend, there's something much bigger going on here." Ammar frowned, trying to process what he was hearing. The way the guard spoke, the secrecy in his tone, made him uneasy. He could feel something unsettling beneath the surface, something no one had told him about. The people getting special treatment in this company, they didn't earn it. "It has nothing to do with their skills," the guard continued. "The CEO, the man everyone respects, has an unusual obsession with Muslims. He specifically hires people from Muslim countries, provides them with luxuries, and keeps them close. But do you know why?" Ammar remained silent, his mind racing with questions. "No one knows the real reason," the guard said. "But it's not generosity. He's not doing this because he cares. He's doing it for something else, and whatever it is, it's big." Ammar's throat went dry. The guard's words echoed in his head. Why would a Christian businessman, known for funding over 200 churches, suddenly become so invested in hiring Muslims and treating them like royalty? What was his real motive? Before Ammar could ask more, the guard gave him a knowing look. "I've been here long enough to see things others don't," he said. "Stay alert. You'll start noticing things soon enough." And with that, he walked away, leaving Ammar standing there, his mind filled with unease. Ammar's car had arrived, but his mind was still tangled in the words of the guard. He sat in the back seat staring out of the window, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Why would a wealthy Christian businessman go out of his way to hire Muslims, shower them with luxuries, and treat them better than even his most qualified employees? The guard's warning had stirred something inside him, a sense of unease that refused to settle. For the next few days, Ammar tried to focus on his work, but the questions never left him. The CEO's unusual generosity, the special treatment, the way he handpicked Muslim employees. It all seemed too deliberate. He was desperate for answers, but he didn't know where to look. As these thoughts consumed him, the holy month of Ramadan was just around the corner. A few days before it began, the CEO called for a special meeting. All Muslim employees were invited. Ammar arrived at the conference room, finding himself surrounded by others who, like him, had been given a privileged status in the company. The CEO entered, smiling warmly, and began addressing them. In an unexpected gesture, he announced that all Muslim employees would receive a generous Ramadan bonus. Not only that, but their working hours would also be cut in half for the entire month. The news spread like wildfire, and excitement filled the room. It seemed like an act of kindness beyond anything they could have imagined. But something felt off. Ammar noticed how every moment of the meeting was carefully documented. Photos were taken, videos recorded, and everything was posted on the CEO's social media accounts. It was as if he was putting on a show, making sure the world saw his generosity. But why? As soon as Ramadan began, an unsettling wave of news spread across Denmark. Overnight, 199 churches had been shut down. If it had been just one or two, it might have gone unnoticed, but the sudden closure of nearly 200 churches was impossible to ignore. The media was in a frenzy. Religious communities were in shock, and no one seemed to have a clear answer as to why it had happened. When the news reached Ammar, a strange feeling gripped him. He was already suspicious of the CEO's unusual generosity toward Muslims. And now, just as Ramadan had started, the churches that he had funded were shutting down. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Something was definitely wrong. Ammar spent the next few hours digging into the situation. His research led him to a startling discovery. The churches that had been closed were all linked to the CEO's funding. Every single one of them had relied on him for financial support. And now, suddenly, they had all been shut down, without warning. But there was one more thing that unsettled him. According to his research, the CEO had ties to exactly 200 churches. If 199 had already closed, it meant only one was left. It was as if he was waiting for the final one to shut down before making some kind of announcement. Ammar felt a shiver run down his spine. What was the CEO really planning? Why was he doing all of this? And why was he so obsessed with Muslims? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but the full picture was still hidden in shadows. The next day, social media exploded with a shocking development. A press conference was being broadcasted everywhere, on news channels, Twitter, and Facebook. The man speaking was none other than the priest of the last remaining church. His face was pale, his eyes hollow with exhaustion, and most disturbingly, there were visible patches of concealer unevenly spread across his skin, as if he were trying to hide something. Ammar watched the live broadcast, his heart pounding. The priest sat stiffly in front of the cameras, gripping the microphone as if he was forcing himself to speak. His words were directed toward the Muslim community. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice unnaturally steady. "I regret that I was late in understanding the truth. But now I have seen the light. The one who truly cares for us, the one who has supported us more than anyone else, is the CEO of this great company." Ammar narrowed his eyes. Something was off. The priest was praising the CEO excessively, calling him a man of kindness and generosity. He spoke as if the CEO was a savior, a guardian of the people, a protector of faith. But his face told another story. His hands trembled slightly, and beneath the layers of makeup, Ammar could make out faint bruises. The more he spoke, the more it became clear. This wasn't a speech of gratitude. It was a forced confession. Something had happened behind the scenes, something the priest was too afraid to reveal. Ammar felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just about generosity, and it wasn't just about shutting down churches. The CEO was up to something much bigger, and Ammar needed to find out what. The entire country was talking about the press conference. The priest's words had spread like wildfire, and among the Muslim community, the CEO was being hailed as a hero. People were in awe of his generosity, his kindness, his support for Muslims. But Ammar couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. Something was wrong. Over the next few days, the excitement in the company grew stronger. Muslim employees spoke about the CEO with admiration, some even comparing him to historical figures known for their generosity toward the oppressed. Ammar, however, kept replaying the priest's speech in his mind. There was something in his tone, in the forced way he spoke, that didn't sit right. He had watched the press conference multiple times, analyzing the priest's expressions, the hesitation in his voice, the concealed bruises on his face. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that the priest was hiding something. Determined to uncover the truth, Ammar started asking discreet questions around the office. He found out that the priest's church was located not too far from where he lived. With a growing sense of unease, he decided to find him. Tracking down the church wasn't difficult. Ammar stood outside its gates, staring at the grand yet abandoned-looking building. A deep breath later, he stepped inside. The place was eerily quiet, and for a moment, he questioned whether coming here was a mistake. When he finally found the priest, his suspicions grew even stronger. The man hesitated upon seeing Ammar, his posture stiff with fear. Something was terribly wrong, and Ammar was about to find out exactly what. But deep down, he knew he was stepping into something far more dangerous than he had imagined. At first, the priest refused to meet Ammar. His voice, shaky yet firm, echoed from behind the door. "I have nothing to say. Please leave." But Ammar wasn't ready to walk away. He knocked again, this time speaking softly. "I saw your press conference. I know something is wrong. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Silence. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open slightly, revealing the priest's tired, worn-out face. Without the makeup, the bruises were clearly visible. His eyes darted around nervously as if he feared someone was watching. He stepped aside and let Ammar in, locking the door behind them. Inside, the church was dimly lit, its silence heavy with unspoken words. The priest sat down, rubbing his temples as if battling an internal war. Ammar could see the hesitation on his face, the fear in his movements. "I shouldn't be talking to you," the priest muttered. "But you know the truth," Ammar pressed, leaning forward, "and you're scared. That means something terrible is happening." The priest sighed, his fingers trembling. "The CEO came to me," he finally admitted. "He demanded that I shut down the church, just like the others. When I refused, he threatened to cut our funding." His voice wavered as he continued. "I told him that God would provide, that we didn't need his money." Ammar listened intently, but the priest's next words made his stomach drop. "That night, his men came. They didn't just threaten me. They made sure I understood. They forced me to go on live television and say what they wanted. I had no choice." Ammar felt a chill run down his spine. The CEO wasn't just generous. He was powerful, and he was ruthless. Ammar felt a deep sense of unease as the priest's words sank in. The bruises on his face, the trembling in his voice, it all pointed to something far more sinister than Ammar had imagined. The CEO wasn't just shutting down churches. He was using force, manipulation, and fear to make sure no one stood in his way. "I have to expose him," Ammar said, his voice firm. "People need to know the truth." But the priest immediately shook his head, his expression darkening. "No," he whispered urgently. "You don't understand. He's too powerful. You think you can go against a man like that and walk away unharmed?" His voice was laced with fear, and Ammar realized just how deep the CEO's influence ran. Ammar's mind raced with possibilities. "But why?" he asked. "Why is he doing all this? What does he gain from shutting down churches while pretending to be a friend of Muslims? The priest hesitated, as if debating whether to tell Ammar the truth. Then, lowering his voice, he finally spoke. Years ago, a rumor spread that the CEO was in love with a Muslim woman. He wanted to marry her, but she refused. She saw him as nothing more than an arrogant, wealthy businessman. Since then, he's been trying to prove himself, trying to become the kind of man she would accept. Ammar stared at him, stunned. That's why he's doing all this? The priest nodded. It's obsession, not kindness. He's trying to rewrite his story, to show her that he's changed, but a man like him doesn't change. Ammar felt a chill run down his spine. The CEO wasn't just powerful, he was dangerously fixated. And now Ammar was caught in the middle of it all. Ammar left the church with a heavy heart, his mind clouded with everything he had just learned. The CEO's actions, the forced church closures, the calculated generosity toward Muslims. It all boiled down to one thing: a desperate, obsessive attempt to win over a woman who had rejected him. A billionaire playing a dangerous game, using power, money, and manipulation to rewrite his story. But what could Ammar do? Exposing him meant putting himself in danger. The priest had already warned him. Going against a man with that much influence was a death sentence. So, for the first time, Ammar chose silence. He buried everything he had discovered deep inside and focused on his work, pretending as if none of it had happened. 2 months later, news broke that shook the entire company. The CEO had converted to Islam. Not only that, but he had married the very woman he had been obsessed with for years. His plan had worked. His influence, his control, his sacrifices, they had all led to this moment. The Muslim employees celebrated, praising his transformation, seeing him as an example of change. Ammar watched from a distance, his chest tight with unease. He knew the truth. This wasn't about faith. This wasn't about kindness. This was about a man who had spent years forcing the world to see him in a different way, using power to shape his own narrative. The CEO's behavior changed even more after the marriage. He became even more generous to his Muslim employees, shutting down the last church under his control. The world saw him as a hero, but Ammar, he saw a man who had rewritten reality, shaping it to his will, and no one even realized it.